Hello there, welcome back. Today I'm going to look at two music documentaries. The first one is Becoming Led Zeppelin, and then the second one is The Damned, Don't You Wish We Were Dead. Now, these films, one was released, the Led Zeppelin one was released this year or last year, and the Damned one was released like 2015. And it's two different takes, really. The Led Zeppelin one is all about how they became Led Zeppelin, hence the title, and it's really deals up to the early lives, up to them joining together and then doing the first two albums. That's really how far it goes. It doesn't go into the debauchery beyond that. Maybe we'll get a sequel. But as the four members of Led Zeppelin and what they did and how they created these well-received albums, even though they weren't initially received, and what the tactic was to break through in America. And The Damned is much more about a career through the 70s all the way up to the modern era. In both cases, they have the original members of the band all doing talking heads, as well as getting musical moments from the past. And one of the good things about both documentaries is they understand it's a music documentary. You want to know what the music was. You don't want to just have talking heads all the way through it. So Becoming Led Zeppelin has quite a few moments where they just stop the talking heads and just let you see like a old recording of a show that of one of the songs as they performed it to the audience. And The Damned don't have the full performance of any song, but they have they leave the music performances long enough to get the idea of what they are, so you know exactly what they're talking about. So both these films have a good understanding of a music documentary has to let you know why the music was so important. So it gives context, which is not talking heads like blathering on about something you don't understand, going, well, why do they care so much? Which is a problem when talking about anything in documentaries that was an experiential thing. Where it's just talking heads, it doesn't really get the point across of why something was important, or someone was important. So I'll start with the Led Zeppelin one because they were the earlier band. They started early. So the film starts off seeing the influences of all four. Now, three of them are still alive. One of them has died. John Bonham died in 1980, or Banham, or something. Now, both of these bands I was not like a big fan of, in a sense of there were bands I knew of but I didn't really know much of the music. And then when you watch the documentary, you realise, oh yeah, I do know a lot of the music. I just didn't know that was them. Yeah, that's the weird thing is, because when I grew up, I was born in the 70s, the early 70s, and I was one of the younger people in the family, the younger cousin thing. So you had cousins who were teenagers listen to lots of music, and you're like, I know tons of this music. I didn't know the names of a lot of the songs, but as soon as the songs went, I know that song. I know that song. So that was the kind of weird advantage I had. Of like, I knew a lot of the songs because I heard them as a kid, but I didn't know who played them, or even just stuff on the radio as well. Like, I listened to the radio a lot when I was a kid, and a lot of this stuff I would have heard it and not click to who it was, really. So my musical taste is actually quite broad, but I don't know who did anything, is the best way to put it. And so, you know, it's not snobbish because I don't know enough of the names. so as I was listening, I was like, I know that song. But I was actually watching it to get an introduction to a band I thought was a blind spot. Because it really was a blind spot of what they did and who they were. It just wasn't one of the bands that I liked from that era. And so, even if you weren't a fan, the documentary is good enough to show you why they're interested and how they come up. Because Led Zeppelin, a lot of the band members were around for a while before they joined Led Zeppelin. I mean, Jimmy Page was a guy who did he's a session player for a long time which session players go in to play for, like, you know, to help bands in recording an album, or to go and to be a background player, or to, if they're doing like a Bond theme, like he was in the Goldfinger arrangement. You know, when, you know, he was there when they were doing Goldfinger. He was one of the players in Goldfinger, so he would go in and do these jobs and make a good living out of it because he was like a respected musician. They knew he started playing early, and people knew he was good at his job. John Paul Jones was the same thing. Robert Plant was a singer who went through some bands and nothing ever really worked out, and he was kind of homeless by the time he hooked up with Jimmy Page. So it was like it was a bunch of things, and John Bonham was he knew Robert Plant, and they had done stuff together, and his wife didn't like Robert Plant because she said he was useless. So the band, the actual documentaries into all these kind of weird, not just the kind of human dynamics of it all, but it's also how trained they all were. They'd all gone through stuff and learned how to do it, how to be good, and they'd all like practiced their craft, like not just a little bit, a lot, like going through stuff that maybe they weren't so keen on, but learning all the time about what they liked and what they didn't like. So when it came together as Led Zeppelin, which was basically to fulfill a, like Jimmy Page was joined something called the Jailbirds, and the band had collapsed towards the end of a tour, and they had still some dates to play. So he brought in so to play those dates, he brought in some, you know, musicians he knew and liked, and said, "Will you come together and do a band for these dates to play these dates?" But I also wanted to create a band, and you'd find people who would actually, he felt was right for his band. Now, he didn't get everyone who he wanted, but the people he got, in some cases, were better than what he was originally planned for. Like, he would ask people for, what about this person, and they'd never really sign a contract. But he found people that seemed to be a right fit for him, and they went to play in his house, the top floor of his house, and they started to come together really quickly because Jimmy Page had a good idea of what he wanted musically. Now, he was never as interested in the lyrics, but he did the lyrics to the first album before Robert Plant took over the second album, because he was writing notes about lyrics and things, and he kind of took over that because he was a lead singer and he kind of found things that were working better. So this was a case of a band who all joined together and everything they had complemented each other. It was one of those things where the right people came together. And the interesting thing about when you look at the music industry is, a lot of cases with bands is they're never as good separately as they are together. It's like they need to bounce off each other. The energy bouncing off each other is what creates music, and improving each other and saying, what about this rather than that, and all this. And you find a lot of friction comes when someone says, no, it has to be done my way, and that becomes an issue for the band sometimes. So, but in this case, they all came together and they all kind of understood each other, and they let each person do their thing. They understood that Bonham was great at the drums, so they could do some stuff with the drums that no one else would do, and they could highlight it, and they could find ways, playing the bass and playing the lead guitar, of pulling it back and letting the drums take over for a little bit. So each person had their own bit in the band, so no one was left out as being not as good. So they'd also listen to what other people were bringing to the band and actually adding that to the song. So it wasn't just one person controlling it. So as they went on, Page was kind of the instigator of the musical ideas. Like, he'd come up with a lot of ideas that were not really things that other people were interested in, other bands he'd been in or other places he'd been in. And because he was a session musician, so he built up a lot of ideas of how to do things differently. And he found the right people to get together. And the film is just about that progression. So it's like kind of does the first two albums when they were still building up and when they were learning, because that's where most of the story is. So they stop before you get to the debauchery era. They cover the death of the drummer and how that split the band up at the end. and how they went their separate ways at that point, and they came back together here or there, like Plant and Jimmy Page got together for certain things, but then sometimes they fell out, and sometimes it was one of those things where, people have their issues with other people, but this was kind of more about the early years, really about when they were really at their best, and before they kind of everything got excessive. So there's a very charming documentary about that, but it's also about the mechanics of a band. So you can look at that and you see why, like, even in the case of some of the Beatles, where they were never quite as good separate. I mean, the Beatles is like, the person who did best at the Beatles is George Harrison, ultimately, because Paul McCartney was never got the same regard when he went on his own, and John Lennon he did some certain things. Well, George Harrison actually did another album straight away coming out of the Beatles, and then he became he helped behind the scenes with certain things and became a film producer. So he did a lot of other things in a way that other Beatles maybe weren't as. It's that thing of just the idea of putting together the dynamics that worked well, that worked as a team. So once people leave, you have to find a new dynamic that will work well for you in a different context. And some people find it and some people don't. It's just one of those things. Because one of the things about the documentary is, like, they were all lucky to find each other in the right time and just create Led Zeppelin. Now, The Damned is a slightly different case. Now, because Led Zeppelin, there was only ever 4 members of the band. There's 4 members of Led Zeppelin. That's it. When one of them died, that was the band over. The Damned, there's tons of versions of The Damned. The Damned changed throughout. And it was created through punk, but it never stuck to punk. It had members who fell out, that were angry with each other, that were calling each other all these different names throughout time. They were friends, then they were enemies, then became friends again. And it's a much messier band. And it never reached the heights of Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin was a mega band that had a good manager and had a plan. They took America first, then took Britain, which is unusual, but it's part of their deal. So they toured America a lot. And they get known in America. The Damned was one of those bands who was cultish. Everyone knew The Damned was, but they weren't Sex Pistols, who was a big punk band. They didn't last very long. They weren't a Clash. They were The Damned. They were this band that just kept on mutating. So even though there was a lot of albums that people loved, there was still a place of members came and went. People would fall out and leave and have to change their style to fit in with this new, different mix of people. So you had the lead singer, who was a goth guy. There was Captain Sensible, who was kind of like the kind of crazy one that got up to hijinks. There was the other guy who, I think it's called Ratface, they called him, who was very helpful. It was pretty much seemed to be the most solid one. At least from, like, he had a business mind. There was a guy who started it who left pretty early because it wasn't quite his thing. And then other people came in and out of it throughout. Captain Sensible became a recording artist on his own for a while, and where basically his fame took away from the band, so he left for a bit. Then he came back. And then the thing is, because the music industry is just lots of waves, it's like you're popular as one thing, then it stops. You're popular as another thing, then it stops. So the Damned just kept on going. They were consistent throughout as being a band that kept on touring throughout. They didn't make tons of money, but they kept working at it. They were lucky to go from one album to the next and have some sort of nest egg in between the albums. They weren't having a nest egg to last them forever. So it becomes a story of a working band that's famous but not mega famous, that had to keep on adapting, had to stick to life on the road and play the old hits while trying to do new albums, and just dealing with the fact that they were musically aligned with each other well, but they might not even know each other that well ultimately outside the band. They might not be like particularly close. And that's another thing about watching these documentaries is these people spend so much time with each other but they grate on each other's nerves a lot, and their bad habits, and at some point they want some time away from certain members of the band because it's just difficult to deal with certain people. And then you develop some affections, but there's like in the Damned documentary, it's like Captain Sensible saying the lead singer, he's known him for years, but she's not quite sure he knows him that well because it's a professional relationship, but you're not sure if he knows him. And it's like, and they were saying about Captain Sensible was like, he's a bit crazy, so you never know what you're going to do. You're going to get in trouble in some way. So it's like you see different personalities like coming in, and I'm just quoting what other people are saying about them. I don't know any of these people, so I don't know. But it becomes interesting thinking of two different bands with very different dynamics and very different successes, but they're both bands whose music's lasted through the years. It's like The Damned still a band I know of, even though I didn't know much of their songs. And then when I watched the films, like, I know some of these songs. The same with Led Zeppelin. Like, I found out that Stairway to Heaven was a song that I'd known for years and didn't realise it was called Stairway to Heaven. That's how little of a Led Zeppelin fan I was. I was like, oh, it's that song, that's Stairway to Heaven. I've heard that for years. I never knew what it was called. It's just that thing. That showed you how weird my musical taste is. It's I know stuff, I've heard stuff, but can't place names. I'm terrible with names generally anyway. So even if they said it's Stairway to Heaven, I'd forget it for about 10 minutes. I'm just that kind of weird brain. So these are two good documentaries that are well worth seeing. If you're interested in music, this is well worth seeing. The Damned one is fairly cheap on streaming. You can get it streaming quite easily. Becoming Led Zeppelin is now available generally, so you'll be able to find it wherever you're looking for it. It's not hard to find. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back soon with another. Right, bye.